If you want to pump your body and expand your mind, there's only one place to go. Mind Pump. Mind Pump with your hosts, Sal DiStefano, Adam Schaefer, and Justin Andrews.
Max Lugavere.
Love this guy.
He's one of my favorite people. I just fucking love him.
You say that a lot.
No. Well, I have a few favorite people.
Yeah, no, you say that too much.
No.
No. I think you should prep with Max. Max is like
he's us.
One of the boys.
Max, Mike, Jordan, Brink. I mean, there's a handful, less than 10. I know that guys that like we stay in contact on almost a daily, for sure, weekly basis.
That's why I say he's one of them.
He's one of the guys that we're that close with. And just because off air, we've connected on a whole other. I mean, no matter what, the guy professionally is incredible. His book's incredible. He's on TV now. He's doing all this great
podcast.
Got a great podcast. But he's for sure our people outside of even the podcast. I wish that he lived close by because I think that him and Mike, both guys that live far away from us, that I think that we would probably hang out with on a regular basis if they were nearby.
He's just a super cool guy. He's got great guests on his podcast. His book has done exceptionally well.
Dude's brilliant.
Yeah, he's a very, very intelligent guy. It's funny that he said that he had trouble in school growing up.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, I think that says more about school than it does about about him. But I mean, again, we love Max. I was on his podcast a while ago, had a great time. He's been on our podcast before that, before his book, Genius Foods came out. And now that it's been out, it's been selling very, very well. He started his podcast afterwards.
He mentions a documentary that I guess he's been working on as well.
We have a great conversation in this episode. We talked to him about his personal life, which is kind of funny. Asking him about his dating life and what that's all like.
Right out the gates.
Well, he's a good-looking bachelor. You know what I mean? Successful, good-looking dude. So, of course, we're going to ask him about
We're just
that
trying to dig a little.
We also, I brought up the blue blockers with him, and he's a huge, huge advocate of that, which I was excited to introduce him to Felix Gray, which is one of our new sponsors.
Yes.
And one of my favorite new sponsors that we have.
Yeah, if you go to Felix Gray Glasses, that's FELIXGRAY glasses.com/mind pump. You could check out, all their stuff. And we did talk about meat quality. Here's something that's interesting. He did talk in this episode, and we did a YouTube video afterwards where he clarified even deeper. Grass-fed meat, the profile of grass-fed meat mirrors kind of the fatty acid profile of the human brain. When it's corn-fed or grain-fed, it's much higher in omega-6s and not quite as healthy for you. And that's a big problem, is that balance of fatty acids. And we did mention our other sponsor, Butcher Box, because all their food is grass-fed.
Grass-fed and grass-finished.
Everything. Yeah, all the way through.
Which was the other part of it that's sneaky, right?
Yeah.
You get some of the grass-fed, but they aren't grass-finished.
That's where a lot of these grocery stores, that's the hustle that people don't know, is people are starting to get savvy with organic. They're starting to get savvy with grass-fed meat, and then now the hustle is grass-fed, but then what they do is the final 2 weeks, they fatten them up with the grains, and they can still legally say grass-fed on the label. So what's neat about Butcher Box is that it's getting grass-fed and grass-finished.
All the way through.
Yep.
So there are other sponsors. If you go to butcherbox.com/mind pump, you'll get free bacon, 2 ribeyes.
You're sold already.
$10 off and free shipping on your first order. So Max, you can find Max. His podcast is the Genius Life Podcast. I highly recommend you go over and subscribe to it. He's got great guests on there, great conversations. His book, of course, is Genius Foods. You could buy that at any bookstore. You can buy it online on Amazon.
You got to check out, too, his documentary that he's working on, too. You can go look at the teaser at breadthemovie.com.
It's Breadhead Movie.
Oh, Breadhead, not Bread, though.
Yeah, breadheadmovie.com. And that's it, man. Without any further ado, here we are talking to our good friend, Max Lugavere.
Max Lugavere.
So we're on the podcast, and we're talking about the different names that gay people call each other for stereotypes.
It's just stuff that comes up.
Gay stereotypes.
Yeah.
There you go. Gay stereotypes that other gays call each other, and we're talking about what would each of us be. And so I said, instead of us speculating because we know nothing about this, let's reach out to our audience. I'm sure somebody has some sort of knows these terms, and so they sent over the list, which by the way is way longer.
Oh man,
yeah, it's like
I had no idea.
There's like 30 names.
It's a bunch of dudes, right?
Yeah.
Guys name. That's what we do. We name things. So he's a twunk.
He's a twink. It's like a mix between a hunk and a twink.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, because he has a girly face, but then the
muscle.
Hunky,
because I have muscles,
I can see that.
Right? Yeah, he's got.
And then Sal was a silver fox and a daddy. He was a combination of silver fox and a daddy. And then Justin is a muscle cub.
A muscle cub.
Muscle cub.
A cub is like a bear, right? So like big, burly, hairy, but he's younger, so he's a cub, and then muscle.
But I'm not even hairy, so it's flawed. I mean, that's a misconception.
I like the terms. I feel like we should lay claim to them ourselves.
That's every picture I say going forward on Instagram. I'm hashtagging muscle cub.
Yeah. I mean, it's in my handle now. I am the muscle.
I wonder what I'd be.
You?
Yeah.
That's a tough one.
Do we have the list? Do you remember?
You could
actually, let's go over that.
You could be a silver fox, but you're too young.
No, you don't have any silver yet.
No, in fact, they said
a little bit of silver.
A little bit.
Well, are you younger? You're younger than Sal, right?
Yeah.
So you couldn't, because Sal was too young to even technically be a silver fox, is what this guy said.
Oh, there's like an age.
Yeah, you wouldn't be a gipster because that's
no, he's not hipster-ish.
No, you're not too hipster.
I'm gonna find the list here,
but that was one of them. And not necessarily a twink,
No.
I wouldn't.
It's too feminine.
You guys give each other hand jobs while I find this real quick.
I'm rolling through them all.
Bro, every time
like a jock, kind of a mix.
Every time I see you, I gotta say, I have to make a comment on this, Max. Every time I see you in person or Insta story or Instagram, you're always with an attractive young lady.
Oh man,
bunch of different.
He just rolled you under the bus.
Are you? He's kind of like the Hugh Hefner of health foods.
Are you? Yeah, you're like the wellness
that brain food's paying off. Buddy.
Yeah, most eligible bachelor of the wellness world. Are you dating someone? Or are you single?
I don't know.
Put him on the spot.
I don't know.
I'm definitely no. I would say I'm single. I'm not formally in a relationship with anybody, but I do have close ties with. With a few females, but I'm.
Is this your politically correct way? Are you in the on it thing, like where you like it's the open the Aubrey Marcus? Or do you subscribe to the sex at dawn?
I do struggle with the philosophy of monogamy, but it's never. I mean, just from speaking from personal actual experience, I've never, when I've been in monogamous relationships, I've never cheated, and I've never really felt the need to make it an open relationship, because I've always personally felt that when I've ever felt strongly enough about a girl to be in an exclusive relationship with them, I wouldn't really want to watch them getting.
This is why all the girls like them.
What you sounds like you're the type of guy which I always tell guys to be like this, which I think. Some dudes struggle with this, and I think you get the bad rap when they become the shady guy who's lying to all the girls just to hook up with all of them. Yeah. It sounds like you're very blunt and upfront. It sounds like if a girl meets you and you guys are hanging out and whatever happens, you probably laid that foundation. Or are you someone like that? Do you communicate that pretty well?
Yeah,
like, this is kind of where I'm at.
Communication, honesty, I think they're integral parts of any solid relationship. But I just don't believe that it's possible to maintain a sexually appreciative relationship with somebody for the entirety of your life. So, I'm not marriage, the concept of marriage I struggle with, long-term monogamy I struggle with. But when I'm with somebody and I'm honestly, committed to that person, then I don't think it's, I've never felt it appropriate to sleep with other people.
I compare monogamy to, because I've heard people make arguments about, what is it called? Polyamory or open relationships.
Yeah.
And they make the evolutionary, arguments and all that stuff. And the way I talk about it is like, look, we all have cravings for eating whatever the fuck we want.
Yeah.
But we don't. Like, why don't I go just eat a bunch of cake and a bunch of candy and a bunch of whatever all the time?
Yeah.
It's not good for me. And I think monogamy it's proven itself to be, if you can do it and you can do it in a meaningful way, is proven to be a superior way of living. Doesn't come without its challenges, of course.
I think it's the ultimate expression of humanity in a sense, and executive function, because one of the cognitive abilities that would fall under the umbrella of executive function is being able to delay gratification and think altruistically. And so, obviously when you initiate a relationship, I think it's always going to be in the compassionate stage, where it's like very sexual, very physical, but then eventually those relationships transition to companionate love. This is something I learned in I majored in psychology in college, and I think that has benefits too, especially as you age. I mean, that's something that is really helpful. I mean, that there are benefits to that.
Absolutely.
To that scenario.
And then there's been, we've known this for a long time, and since this is your field of study, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but when we do observational studies on societies, monogamous ones versus ones where there's a husband and many wives, monogamous relationship or societies far more peaceful, much more violent in the societies where people own multiple wives, and they think it has to do with the fact that the wealthy men at the top hoard all the whatever you want to call it, sexual resource or whatever, and then men at the bottom are left without any options and they become violent and whatever.
Well, as humans, aren't we designed to seek novelty as it is, right? And then do you think that starts to decline as we get older? So maybe it's probably a more natural thing to wait to settle all the way down for a long-term relationship. What's your thoughts on that?
Totally, yeah. I mean, I think people's sex drives change, but I agree with that idea about monogamy as it being sort of something that actually favors men. It guarantees sort of one sexual partner for every guy, even if that guy doesn't happen to be, at the top of the dating pool, so to speak. But yeah, for somebody, I think where monogamy really becomes difficult is for men with options. I mean, it sounds kind of crude to talk about it that way.
Yeah. No. Chris Rock says it best, man. Your guys are only as faithful as their options. Yeah. So you always hear the guy who's bragging about, just me and my wife. Like, motherfucker, ain't no one trying to fuck you. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's real easy to be fucking faithful when nobody wants to have sex with you. Try being the guy who's walked down the street and pussy's getting thrown at him every 5 minutes. Total different story.
I mean, yeah.
Right?
Tiger Woods, am I right?
Yeah. Every guy.
Hence why Max is like, no, I'm cool. I'm not.
Well, I mean, I'm curious because when you said that, and even the way that you articulated it, it sounds similar. Because I'm the same way too. I'm not like against one way or the other way, or I feel like I stand on one side. But I do have my own personal views. I think that many people's perception of what love is, is distorted and confused with lust. And I think that a lot of my personal experience in life and growing up, I'm still learning to love myself fully. And I don't think that you can love another partner fully until you've learned to love yourself. And so, I have different views on marriage and when to get married and things like that. Where do your views like that come from? Does it stem from childhood? Did you have a good or a bad example with your family, or where does that come from?
I had a good question. By the way, I love how sensitive you guys are. Like, it's really cool because on the
He's just talking about pussy flying out of it.
Well, okay, fair, but you're
sort of balances it out.
But you're able to volley between really sort of like male, locker room sort of conversation, but then also like you guys have like a soft center, which I appreciate. Okay, so my upbringing, my parents had a pretty bad marriage, and so that's sort of the template that I'm trying to unwire and rewire and sort of fix. My parents were together for 18 years. They had a business together. They were great parents, but their relationship was totally crappy, and they were both very poor growing up, and they reached a level of success together with the business that they created. And the minute they became successful, my dad, became kind of not a womanizer, but he definitely loved like boats, cars, hot women, and he cheated on my mom all the time. And that's sort of well known in my family. But nonetheless, they were both my mom's a very codependent woman, and they stayed together for a long time. And then finally, when I turned 18, they broke up. But they're both still they never got remarried. And my dad's in Miami, he's kind of alone by himself, and my mom sort of has a significant other, but somebody who she's not in love with, and certainly not attracted to sexually, and still I think kind of longs for my dad. And it's just it kind of screwed me up in many ways, I think. Because I just I don't have that template for what.
Were you the youngest?
I'm the oldest.
Okay. Oh, so you turned 18 and then they.
Yeah, when I turned 18, I went to college. My parents got a divorce, and just never great. My mom was like, she had this like weird relationship with her mother. Her mother was always around, probably drive my dad nuts too. I mean, it wasn't all on my dad. So yeah.
When I was, I didn't start to put this together. I loved psychology in college. Now I didn't go all the way through college and finish, but that was my first experience in taking a psychology class, and a lot of the books that I've read as I've gotten older is in that field. And that's really when I started to learn all this. Like, I started to unpack it and go, oh, this is where this comes from. Because a lot of people,
would say to me, or especially girls that I'd be dating, that because I wouldn't commit, I wouldn't settle down, I wouldn't give you, like, I'd get these girls that were great and we'd have this great chemistry and they'd be like, they want to lock it up, and I'd be like, no. And I'd be very honest. I'd be say, hey, I really like you, I enjoy spending time with you, and we can hang out, but I know where I'm at in my life right now, and I'm just not ready to give.
At least you're honest.
Yeah, and I was. And it got me, I did really well for myself as far as like relationships. Like, I don't have a lot of women out there that hate me or anything like that because I was truthful. Now, it might have hurt their feelings when I first said it, but they always respected me later on for that. Do you remember what that was like for you, like going through college? Like, was that when you started to like kind of unfold all this, or did you have similar situations in relationships?
Well, I mean, I went to school at University of Miami in Florida, and I as an undergraduate, I think my junior year of college, I met who was the most beautiful girl who I'd ever seen in my life, and I began dating her, and we broke up after 4 months because she was a bit younger and she was sort of like immersed in the craziness that is South Beach and being young and hormone fueled and being attractive in one of the most superficial cities on earth. And so that the relationship back then was kind of a nightmare, but we ended up getting back together a couple years later and, dating and it kind of continued to be on and off for a couple years after that. And it's kind of a pattern that I kind of think maybe is a little bit illustrative of like the pattern that I saw in my parents growing up. But, I've dated, many girls, but always sort of, I guess burdened with the grass is greener on the other side, mentality. And, my fear is that I'll, one day, 20 years from now, I'll look back and I'll be like, look, the grass was greener because it was fucking fake. But I don't know, it's like,
you split your time between East and West Coast quite a bit, right?
Yeah.
Is there a big difference in the people and dating between those two coasts?
It's hard, man. I don't really put a lot of energy into dating. I'm just not good at it. Like, I don't, I'm not on any of these dating apps. Every time I try to go on it because I've heard, anecdotally some friends are really successful at it, I always find it to be a major waste of time, and I'm just not good at it. And, I have commitment issues. I can't even commit to a city. Like I don't even honestly know how to describe where I live. And, but on the other hand, it's allowed me to filter kind of that angst, I guess, about it into my career and into my work and into my, so. Let's
talk about that for a second. Cause the last time we had you on the show, great interview, by the way. Love talking to you. You were just about to release your book, Genius Foods. Since then, blown up.
We've seen you everywhere. We watched you on Dr. Oz. I think we were in the hotel room, and I was like, "Oh my God, look, it's Max!"
Awesome.
That was awesome because we just flown into LA. We were there for something else, right?
Yeah.
And Justin and I had a room, and as soon as we turned the TV on, it was like literally Max was on the TV. I'm like, "Oh, this is so crazy!"
So now you're like one of the guys or one of the people in this wellness world, which is riddled with a lot of false information. There's some great information in there. There's a lot of snake oil, and there's a lot of what seems to be contrary information. What's that been like for you? Now that you've blown up, how have things changed for you? Are people coming after you? Are people starting to try to debate you and discuss your ideas and say, well, that's not what this literature says or whatever? What's that been like?
It's a really good question. I mean, I think one of the coolest things is just the fact that the book that I wrote, Genius Foods, has gotten out there. It's really, I get dozens, if not 100 messages every single day across different platforms about how some way in which the book has helped improve the life of another person. People, healthcare practitioners, their patients are some of them dealing with cognitive problems. They literally recommend my book to their patients, which is incredible.
That's so awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I have a background in journalism, but I obviously did the homework. But it's just amazing that my book is actually having such an impact on people's health. So that to me is great. I get, in certain areas, I'll get like recognized, people coming up to me on the street, like telling me that they love the book. That's like insane.
That's weird, right?
In terms of like debating me, yeah, I mean, I'm in it for the truth. So for people that don't know, if you're listening, like I wrote Genius Foods, which I consider to be the definitive care manual to the human brain. And I wrote it without any preconception, without any bias. The reason why I wrote it is because my mom has dementia. And she has a sort of rare form of it, and it's fucking horrible. Like I was just in New York for the past 2 weeks, spending as much time as I could with my mom, and it is unbearable to see the person that you love most in the world descend into, this condition that is whatever the stereotype you have of a person succumbing to the ravages of dementia. That's what my mom has right now, and it's horrible. And there's no way out. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. There's nothing good to come of it. And so I really am dedicated to putting this truthful message of science and nutrition and how lifestyle can affect brain function out there in a way that's like, accurate and free of bias and without marketing attached to it and any of that stuff. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of crap advice on the internet, especially like, I've had a decent amount of success on Instagram lately. On Instagram, I mean, you name it. Like,
oh, geez.
It's like the worst, there's obviously a lot of people putting out, or I would say a handful of good, people out there putting out good advice. But generally speaking, I mean, there's tons of misinformation. Whenever I post anything about meat, for example, I get hordes of plant-based vegan, and I love vegans. I have nothing against, making that carefully considered moral decision.
You're about to go speak to probably a bunch of them this weekend.
Yeah,
right?
possibly. Yeah.
There's a good chance.
Yeah. But yeah, they always come out. They're so militant, and it's just like,
it's their religion. That's why.
Yeah. I get kind of tired, like batting them off and, people just posting blatant pseudoscience on my profile. And, at first I was like trying to like debate everybody, but I mean, at this point I really can't. And, but yeah, I mean, it's, I think it's really cool. We live in an amazing time. We have a lot of answers. There's still a lot of unknowns. So I don't ever purport to have all the answers. I don't, but there's like cool people, citizen scientists out there doing their own research, providing insights, adding to this sort of tapestry of knowledge that I think it's amazing. We live in a time that we all have access to, because I sit in doctor's offices with my mom on the regular, and mainstream medicine, man, like you don't want to get to the point. Like we are so poorly equipped in this society for
chronic disease.
For chronic disease. I don't want to just talk, badly about the medical profession, because I have a ton of respect for medicine. I actually, deep down, I love medicine. I love the practice. I was pre-med for the first 2 years of college. And I know some doctors that are phenomenal, but the vast majority of experiences that I've had with my mom in the traditional medical system has been disgusting, like just horrible. Doctors operating according to script, keeping my mom on drugs that are indicated for her, but not, they're probably making her worse, or likely, contributing to, her symptoms as opposed to actually alleviating any of them. Because of course none of them have a disease modifying effect. So it's basically just, it's a nightmare. And also, when it comes to my mom, I feel like in many ways she was victimized by not just the medical system, but medical, or I should say health misinformation that's been out there. My mom was from a generation where they didn't have the internet. Like whatever she knows about health, she got from media, the media of her time, not social media, not, clickbait, like, websites and things like that, but like magazines,
Reader's Digest and stuff like that.
Yeah. So that's why, like, I have a real vendetta against anybody putting out nutritional misinformation, because it's actually doing harm, more harm than anybody with a social media account can possibly realize.
Well, I think that's the same thing that we felt about fitness advice. Like, I mean, we see the same thing in the fitness industry as, these people, and a lot of people, I think, felt like when we first came out, thought it was like hate. And it's like, no, it's not. But it's that same vendetta that we have. If, you guys don't realize that a lot of this information that you're giving these people out, we're doing more harm than good. We're supposed to be these health and fitness professionals. When you're advising people and you think you're motivating them with the, beast mode, the all out, the no days off, and the, this push shit, it's like, the average person sees that and they just try and emulate what you're doing. And what you don't realize is you end up setting that person back potentially years potentially to get out of that hole. And we saw the same thing.
I do see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel here with with Western medicine in regards to nutrition. We're now seeing fields like nutritional psychiatry starting to come out, which 10, 15 years ago, if you walked into a psychology class or you talked to a psychiatrist and you said, hey, I think you could treat depression with diet, they would laugh you out of the room.
Yeah.
Today, they're now studying the effects of how nutrition can affect the mind and they're giving it a lot of credence with science and study. And it's difficult because science takes a while, I think, to catch up. But because of the internet, one thing that I'm seeing now, Max, is so I have a godson who's got Crohn's disease, and when he first got diagnosed, something like 7 or 8 years ago, and there was very little in terms of, I mean, there was symptom control, and some of that was terrible. Some of it was basically low dose chemotherapy to kind of just shut down his immune system. But there wasn't anything that dietary that they really recommend. Basically, like, well, just stay away from things that bother you. So my aunt went online. And in the past, you could never listen to anecdote because it was one person or two people telling you this is what worked for me. But when you go online and you have forums that are dedicated to Crohn's disease and you see thousands of anecdotes and people saying, hey, this diet called the carbohydrate-specific diet, I think is the name of it, is helping all these people with Crohn's. My aunt, she's a registered dietitian who was way like pro-Western medicine. When this happened, she went online and she's like, let me try this. And it worked. Wow. Totally put him in remission. What do you think about all that when you're looking at some of this information that's coming out with nutritional psychiatry?
Well, I mean, the perfect example of that is an anecdote, from people online, but I mean, specifically who comes to mind is Michaela Peterson, who I feel like you guys have talked about.
We had her on the show.
Yeah. Oh, you did? Oh, amazing. Yeah, I mean, I think the carnivore diet is super interesting, right? Like on first glance, when I first heard about it, I was like, what is this bullshit? Like in light of everything that I know about like the microbiome and, the value of fiber consumption, polyphenols, like all that stuff, I couldn't believe that a diet so extreme could be doing anybody any good. But then I thought about it, and I actually have a pretty good, I think, working hypothesis as to what it may be doing. I feel like for most people, for most people, when we were tribal, right, and living as hunter-gatherers, you could almost assume that everybody in the tribe had a similar, if you made it past childhood without, getting killed off by any number of pathogens, you probably had a fairly robust immune system, right?
Very much so.
Like you were born vaginally, you were breastfed, none of that formula crap, right? You were not overprescribed antibiotics. So you had a robust enough immune system, and there was genetic heterogeneity. So like or homogeneity, I should say rather. You were all probably of the same gene pool in that tribe. And so you can get away, everybody in that tribe probably ate a similar diet, right? And probably felt fine. Today, the problem is we have widespread immune dysfunction. And everybody is struggling these days. I mean, rates of autoimmunity are on the rise. And that's
exploding.
So it's like exploding. People have dysfunctional immune systems to the point where their immune systems are attacking their own enzymes and tissues and proteins and things like that, right? People have sensitivities and allergies and, conditions defined by chronic inflammation and things like that. So we all have these dysfunctional immune systems fed by the fact that the microbiome has become basically an afterthought, right? Like some of us are born via C-section. We're not breastfed. We, are overprescribed antibiotics. We have an obsession with sterility and things like that. And so for people with a dysfunctional immune system, I feel like it's one of these like context-specific, N of one, like no one-size-fits-all dietary approach cases where, plant compounds that initiate what's called molecular mimicry in the body may basically further confuse an already confused immune system. So for anybody with like autoimmunity, Crohn's disease, any of these like sorts of conditions, it actually makes a lot of sense to me that by cutting out all plants, at least for a little while, that you're going to see a reprieve from symptoms.
Well, the way, and that's very similar to the way I kind of explained it, because we had Dr. Sean Baker on, who's the guy that's popularized the carnivore diet. And we went a little back and forth with a little bit of debate, and I basically said the same thing. And what people need to understand is the immune system, when you say robust immune system, I think people think this super strong, hyper-vigilant immune system. That's not what a healthy immune system is. A healthy immune system is an intelligent immune system. It knows when to react and when not to react. It knows not to overreact. An immune system that's unhealthy tends to either be super, super depressed, in which case you're probably going to die of the common cold or some other virus, or what we're seeing a lot of is an immune system that doesn't know the difference between friend or foe, and it starts to identify foods as foreign invaders, and it mounts these immune system responses. And so what you have with some people is they're so hyper-reactive, their immune systems are so hyper-reactive to the foods that they're eating that they feel much, much better by eliminating almost everything except for the one food that probably has the lowest rate of, I would say, food intolerance, which also, I think, points to the fact that that's probably the food that we relied on the most for lots of periods of time, because you could just eat meat and survive. I don't think it's ideal, but you could just eat meat. It has everything that you need in it. You don't need much vitamin C when you're not, processing carbohydrates and all that. But it's not an ideal diet. But for someone like Michaela Peterson, or Sean Baker, or all these other people, let me tell you something. The immune system is a fingerprint. It's very, very unique, and I think that's the reason. I would say that's the number one reason why diets are work so differently for so many different people. Because I've had clients. I'll tell you what. When I first became a trainer, Max, I was pro omnivore, right? And when someone would come to me and they'd say I'm a vegan, I'd be like, oh, well, you can't get all the nutrients, you can't. And scientifically speaking, I could make a pretty good case against veganism. And then I had this one client who he used to track everything, write everything down. He was super he would do everything I told him. And he always had kind of gut issues, didn't really feel good. He was a doctor and did one of those Doctors Without Borders, trips or whatever. And the tribe that he was staying with was vegan, and because of their belief system, he came back. He's like, I feel amazing. Started eating vegan, and he felt great. I kind of had to swallow it a little bit and say, okay, well, everybody's, I guess, a little bit different. And I think that may be why we get so much conflicting information with nutrition. You know what I mean?
Well, speaking of conflicting information right now, what is this that's going out again with the coconut oil?
Yeah, there was some Harvard professor that said it was like poison, pure poison. Was the quote.
It's back in the news again, huh?
Oh my God, totally like hyperbolic, clickbaity. I mean, that's not even a scientific phrase like that. Pure coconut oil is poison because it's just not. I mean, there are communities that, coconut oil is a staple in their diet. Look at like anybody from Thailand or the Philippines. So yeah, it's not poison. It's just that this was, unfortunately another example of like, something that this German Harvard professor, which means less and less, by the way, these days, I feel like, went viral on the internet. And I mean, you know what they say, the dose makes the poison. I don't think that coconut oil is in any way poisonous, but I also don't think that it's like the miracle food that many health gurus on Instagram, make it out to be. Like people are putting coconut oil in their fruit smoothies and things like that. I don't use any coconut oil. I mean, sometimes I'll use MCT oil. I'm actually a fan of MCT oil, but in terms of coconut oil and what I use that for, I mean, like very seldom. I don't even cook with it, honestly, because there are other, oils that I prefer to cook with. But yeah, I mean, the concern about coconut oil really stems from the fact that it contains mostly saturated fat. But the latest meta-analysis that I've seen, a really robust study of studies published in BMJ Open, I believe is the journal, found no clear association between saturated fat consumption and heart disease risk. And
there were some studies that showed that people who ate more saturated fat were actually healthier in some cases.
Yeah, there's a small study that adding saturated fat to the diet I found can improve health. There's another, I mean, it's all, nutrition research, you kind of have to like mix and match, but there was a cool crossover study that I looked at, actually I was looking at today, where they gave, they put people on these like Mediterranean style diets, and it was a crossover trial. So they had them eat these Mediterranean style diets, and on the first iteration of the diet, they had them eat like very low amounts of red meat. And because of the dietary pattern as a whole, they were consuming more extra virgin olive oil, more, plant material, things like that. They had an improvement in their cardiometabolic like risk factors and risk markers. And then in the crossover version of basically the diet that they adopted, they told them to add more meat, like double the recommended amount of meat. And what they found was that their numbers continued to improve. So it's really not about any one particular food. It's about the dietary pattern as a whole,
Let's talk a little bit about the myths surrounding saturated fat, because for a long time, for most of my life and yours, we were told that it was the devil, avoid it at all costs. Actually, fats in general were the devil. And let's talk a little bit about that. How did we develop that policy? Why was that even a thing? Why did that become government policy to tell us all to avoid fat?
It stems from one guy. I mean, that's sort of how I understand it. A pathologist named Ansel Keys at the University of Minnesota, who basically at a time when nutrition science was just being born in this country, and we really kind of were the flag bearers for the rest of the world in terms of nutritional research. There was an epidemic of heart disease in this country, and Ansel Keys was this pathologist who embarked on a number of epidemiological studies looking at large populations and presented a graph showing a perfect correlation between saturated fat consumption eventually. At first it was just total fat consumption, but he narrowed it down to saturated fat consumption and deaths from heart disease. But the problem is that he showed this perfect linear correlation among
the seven country studies.
Isn't this the same one that he teased out? The ones that
he took two countries out, I think, right?
Two that countered his argument, right?
What, France with the
France and
omelet
Italy,
French?
yeah.
I mean, it was. That study was heralded because he went around the world drawing blood labs and things like that. And so he did like a fair amount of work on it. He, stationed himself in Crete where he got to look at the Mediterranean dietary pattern. But the problem is that he omitted data that was available from other countries where there was no clear association between heart disease risk and saturated fat consumption. But nonetheless, he was apparently, a very charismatic person. He landed on the cover of Time magazine. And again, this was at a time where there was immense pressure on these academics to come up with a solution to the nation's heart disease problem. So when there's that kind of pressure and, people were really looking for answers and it was just a vacuum of nutritional information at the time, that it was a neatly enough packaged story that he could sell it to both doctors and the public. And that really became
government
gospel.
policy.
Yeah, it became government policy.
Yeah.
People don't know this actually, but he implanted that idea into the American Heart Association at the time, which was this like little known professional organization. And then Procter & Gamble invested about $1 million into it. And Procter & Gamble, they produce Crisco and unsaturated vegetable, oils and fats and things
Weird.
like that. Yeah, weird. No conflict of interest
incentive
there.
at all.
Yeah. And that whole time there were other professors who vehemently opposed Ansel Keys' ideas about fat. There was John Yudkin and this guy Pete Ahrens, and I detail this a lot in the book, but essentially that's what paved the way for the fact that growing up in my house, we always had those pale yellow tubs of margarine. There was always corn oil by the stove. My mom was always terrified of eating eggs, and she never ate red meat or anything like that because, we have this idea that saturated fat clogs our arteries. Now, we now know that that's not true. Okay, so what happens in the body is a lot different than what happens when you pour, than when you pour grease down a cold drain. But still, that being said, saturated fat does have an interesting effect on the body. And in my book, work, I focus on brain health, preventing Alzheimer's disease, cognitive decline, things like that. There's really no evidence that eating lots and lots of saturated fat benefits health, on the other side of the coin.
Right. So
in terms of just like hedging your bets, and which I think is smart when it comes to your health, I'm not one of those people that's like putting, as I mentioned, coconut oil on everything and butter on everything. Like, people have different genes. They have different ways in which they respond to saturated fat. Again, it's about the context in which that fat is being consumed. So if you look at your diet, if you're consuming a lot of polyphenols and plant materials and things like that, I'm almost positive that the saturated fat is going to be better tolerated. But they've done studies, I believe, in pigs, but, the mammalian digestive tract is pretty strongly conserved. And they find that, pure saturated fat leads to a translocation of this endotoxin stuff, basically these bacterial fragments that are really powerfully inflammatory from your gut lumen into your circulation. So it's basically like saturated fat consumption
can increase inflammation.
Yeah.
Interesting.
In certain people. It also, one of the things that it does, we all know that it raises cholesterol. Whether or not that's good or bad, that's debatable. Actually, we probably don't even know the full picture, but it does tend to raise LDL cholesterol and HDL cholesterol. And one of the mechanisms by which it does that is it reduces the amount of LDL receptors on the surface of the liver. So this is a really important...
Interesting.
Yeah. So the liver basically serves hundreds of functions in the body. One of those functions is recycling lipoproteins and lipids, right? And it does that by popping these like LDL receptors up to the surface of the liver and then taking in the LDL particle before it gets, they're all sort of shipped out from the liver initially when they're large and buoyant. These are like the large, dense...
The big fluffy ones or whatever?
Yeah, or not large, dense, large and buoyant, fluffy, LDL particles is like the sort of, the cardiovascularly favorable pattern of like the LDL particle. And before they get too small, they're supposed to be sucked back up by the liver. But what saturated fat does is it basically reduces the amount of LDL receptors on the liver, which I don't think we want, especially for people that are genetically perhaps less effective at that recycling process.
Very interesting. So what this is for me personally, what I've noticed is if I eat a diet that's high in saturated fat and a diet that's higher in carbohydrates, I personally notice more inflammation. Now I have a very, very obvious sign, and that's gut issues, but I'll also notice stiffness in my joints. If my saturated fat intake's high, but my carbohydrate's very low, and I'm eating more of a keto style diet, I notice my inflammation is quite low. And it may have to do with the anti-inflammatory effects of ketones themselves or something like that. So now let's talk about protein. In our space, protein is the magic macronutrient. You can't have too much of it. Just eat as much protein as you possibly can because you're going to build more muscle and all that other stuff. What about protein's role in overall health or even in brain health? Are there studies that show that there's ideal amounts of protein, or is it a huge range?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of like to walk that line between body composition. I learned a lot from you when you were on my podcast.
Oh, appreciate it.
But no, protein's important. It's the most satiating of the macronutrients. I think as people get older, especially, I like to kind of talk to people of all ages. But sarcopenia is a real thing. People do begin to lose muscle mass. As you guys are well aware, it becomes harder to gain and maintain muscle as you get older. And having stronger muscles, is directly related to better brain health and better brain function. For many reasons. It's a great way to maintain insulin sensitivity by having stronger muscles, right? It's also, one of the least or, lesser appreciated roles of having more muscle in your body is a greater ability to dispose of glucose. Right. Glucose is highly damaging in the body. It's one of the reasons why we have such conserved homeostatic mechanisms to get your blood sugar down whenever we decide to spike it, right? With like sugary foods and carbs and things like that. But we only have we have limited places in our body with which, in which we're able to store sugar, right? We've got our liver, which can only, store about 125 grams if you're a big person. And then our muscle tissue. And muscle, we have, a much larger amount. But if you don't have a lot of muscle tissue, then your ability to store sugar is pretty limited, I would think, and that sugar, when you consume it, has nowhere to go, especially if you're chronically sedentary.
And it's
you're fat.
And it's a bit of a positive feedback loop, because I just read another study that showed that sitting for long periods of time reduces blood flow to the brain.
Yeah.
We also know that BDNF is which is a wonderful, I don't know what you want to call it, chemical or whatever that's released in the brain. It helps improve the function of your neurotransmitters and your neurons in your brain, and it's like bathing your brain in something that's very helpful. Yes, there you go, Miracle-Gro. And movement does that, and so there's this kind of positive feedback loop where because I've seen this in my career as a personal trainer, where someone gets older, they hurt themselves, so they can't move. Their mental degeneration accelerates rapidly, very, very quickly. I have personally seen this myself, where I've trained people in their 70s and 80s, and for 10, 12 years, and I'll see maybe a barely subtle decline in mental cognitive function, and then they'll get hurt and they'll be bedridden for 2 months, and then I'll see them, and it's like we accelerated it by 10 years. It's like boom, because they couldn't move, and then there's that positive feedback loop. So it's like not have enough muscle, don't have a lot of strength, increase your immobility, maybe hurt yourself. That's not good for your body and your brain. So indirectly, protein, just to help build muscle, may help with that.
Protein's super important. And I also think that we have a biological imperative to not be wasteful and eat the whole animal. Certain amino acids found in certain parts of the animal help us better metabolize amino acids found in other parts of the animal. So they've done really interesting studies in rats where they've fed rats high methionine diets. Methionine is an amino acid concentrated in muscle meat. And we're getting, a pretty high concentration of that if all we do is eat muscle meat, like the steaks and things like that we tend to eat in the modern world. But glycine, which is an amino acid found in collagen,
cartilage, and connective tissue, right?
Yeah, actually, when they fed those mice this high methionine enriched diet, it actually shortened their lifespans. But that shortening of their lifespans was abolished once they started supplementing the mice also with glycine. So I think when it comes to eating lots and lots of protein, I think it's also really important to
where all the protein's coming from, right?
Yeah, to get a broad array of
eat your organ meats and all that other stuff,
Yeah, and also to occasionally maybe take breaks from protein consumption, get that mTOR activity.
They have studies that show that when you fast from protein or you go low protein, you actually increase what they say is increase your sensitivity to protein and utilize it more efficiently for what we want it for, which is repair and rebuild. Now, I noticed this as somebody who's trying to build muscle, and I noticed this when I would fast or when I'd go. I used to have vegan days where I would just eat nothing but vegetables for 1 or 2 days. Then I'd go back to eating protein, and I'd feel like this rebound effect when I'd work out, and I'd feel like I build more muscle. And I brought this up to our friend Ben Pekulski, who's was a pro IFB bodybuilder, massive human being. And he totally loved it. And he agreed. And he's like, oh no, I have my athletes do the same thing, which I'm like, oh shit, you're a bodybuilder. And you said that. I never thought he would have said that at all.
Dude, Matt, I want to talk to you a little bit about your podcast, Max. I know that you just started this. Like, what has been your strategy going forward with your podcast? Because I know it's a different platform entirely. Do you have a goal with it? Is it different than what you're talking about in your book? Yeah. What kind of guests have you had? All that kind of stuff. My strategy, my goal is to be a fraction as good at podcasting as you guys.
Oh God!
Stop!
Stop!
Thank you for that hand job. Thank you. I'm almost finished.
You do a fucking great job on your podcast.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, you have a great podcast.
Thank you. No, thank you. I like people. People have really responded to it, but it's like one thing that I'll definitely tell you that I do is I edit like a little bit, to make sure that, because I come from a school of thought where I used to work in TV, and everything I put out, like I'm doing. In the back of my head, I'm like, is this in the service of the audience?
Yeah.
So I'm always trying to cut down and make more concise and more clear and things like that. And so if I ask a question that's not as clear as I wanted to, I'll cut out the whatever is distracting, and I'll work on the intros and things like that. But I also think that there's an amazing thing about just putting the raw stuff up and being really present and just putting up, a conversation as it happens, which I feel like you guys do.
Well, there's definitely, we're seeing this happen right now in our space, and it's really fun and interesting to watch. Is there's a place for both of those, right?
Yeah.
There's definitely a place for the Joe Rogan, the Mind Pump style of podcast where we could potentially carry on for 3 hours and bullshit about topics that have nothing to do with brain health. We're talking about your sex life in the first 10 minutes, which, somebody who's tuning in just to hear Max speak about brain health could give two shits about. But somebody who really wants to know more about you may really appreciate that. So I think there's places for both. For both types of podcasts.
Long form seems to be growing quite a bit, and I think part of it is the bandwidth was limited because you came from you do a lot of old media and new media, right?
Yeah.
The TV, radio. You were in that space. Now you're in the new media space where we're not limited with bandwidth, so we don't have to make our point in 10 minutes. We could just go for 3 hours if we wanted to, and it was a bit of a gamble, but people seem to appreciate it. Are you having fun having these long conversations with people?
I love it. Yeah. I mean, it's just another platform for me. I used to have a TV show, and then I was, and I still am working on a documentary, and I reached out and interviewed a lot of researchers for my book, but, many of those interviews were untaped. They were just kind of like me taking notes. So the podcast is an amazing way for me to be able to connect with people that I find interesting and have conversations with them, tape them, learn more about topics that I'm interested in. I think what's different about my show, The Genius Life, compared to my book is that my book is really a deep dive into nutrition, and The Genius Life really is about, my goal is for it to be broader than just nutrition. So I've been talking to a lot of people. Anybody who can offer a crumb on the sort of scavenger hunt trail to truth for me, I want to have them on. But one of my favorite episodes that I did recently was with a singer-songwriter named Matt Nathanson, who's very well known in the singer-songwriter space. He's had a number of hit songs, and he was on the road recently with the band OAR, who a lot of people know. And Matt's this great guy who I was actually a fan of his music long before I became friends with him, and I got to meet him, and we became friends maybe 10 years ago. And aside from being an insanely talented artist and singer-songwriter, he's just a brilliant guy. And I was like, this guy, has tons of wisdom to drop, and I want to be able to have a platform where I can just have conversations with people that I find interesting, so that was a great episode. I had you on, Sal. Yeah. Obviously that was great. I had Dr. Sachin Panda, who's one of the leading researchers in circadian biology. That was an amazing
Was there anything
episode.
in there that kind of blew you away from what he was talking about?
Man, I just think it's it's just so cool how complicated we are. It's intimidating, but at the end of the day, it's just amazing that evolution really has thought of everything, And we're just trying to figure it out. We're like just scratching the surface. You know?
Because you have that knowledge, it's also, you also deliver a message, and I really appreciate how you deliver that. You don't speak in these certainties that a lot of people.
You're not dogmatic.
Yeah, you're not dogmatic about anything that you talk about, and I feel like that's something that we all share that's in common. I think why we've had a lot of success is because of that. Is like, we kind of present the information that we've learned in our journey, and it's not this is the way. Where I think there's a lot of people out there that tend to do that. They learn a little bit of knowledge, they get a little bit of information, and then they form a camp, and then it's all.
Well, they
about
get a
them.
lot of attention because you get a lot of attention when you're dogmatic. It's much more difficult to say it depends.
We have this unfortunate cognitive bias, us humans. Like the less we know, the more we feel like we know. And the more we know, the less we feel like we know.
It's so true.
And it's really unfortunate, but it's true. Like most experts that I would, interview in the space. I mean, look, I've been called an expert. I wrote a New York Times bestselling book. Like I get brought onto these shows to talk about, nutrition topics, health topics, things like that. The word expert to me, like I don't even like it, honestly, because like there's so many more unknowns, and I'm so excited to learn more and ask questions. And I think a real expert really kind of just knows the right questions to ask. That's what it's all about.
When you look at this past year, what are some of the things that you think you've learned recently? What are some of the things you've picked up? I know you had Sal on, and I'm sure he dropped some great fitness knowledge for you and stuff like that. But when you think about all the guests and your learnings, I know you're a guy that's constantly growing and reading and learning. What are some of the bits of knowledge that you've picked up over the last year?
Man, I mean, I think, learning more about circadian biology, it's definitely become really interesting. The natural inclinations of our body during the specific times of day, in the morning, the sort of fat burning window that we have at night, and the kitchen closes, so to speak, in the body. Just sort of honoring.
Talk about that. Go a little bit deeper into that, and like how you've started to apply some things in your life. Do you subscribe? Do you use the blue blockers at night when you're on your computer? Do things like that? Like, what are some of the things that you're doing personally because of this newfound knowledge?
Well, I'm a big fan of blue blockers. I wear those, especially if I'm doing work or watching TV into the wee hours. I always have those on. Blue light really does send a signal to our brains that it's daytime.
It's been one of the biggest game changers that I've done. We recently got a sponsor.
Seems silly, but it works.
Felix Gray. And what I love, so I've always tried the blue blocker thing. And in the past, when I would do blue blockers, the one thing I would hate about them is they're so orange that it distorts the television and the computer. Yeah. Well, these ones that Felix Gray has, they're like clear, but they still block out the blue light. So I can sit there and enjoy a movie or be on my computer and not feel like my colors are distorted. And I notice a huge difference if I just notice as soon as the sun goes down and I'm in the house, lights are all on still, I'm on computer or watching TV, I just throw them on. And man, my sleep has been night and day difference since then.
Yeah. Conversely, I would often realize, and only now can I sort of identify why I would feel this way, but when I'm in New York, I spend a lot of time with my brothers, and they have more traditional jobs. So one of the things that they love to do is binge watch like Netflix shows when they get home from work. So I would do this too with them, and for a while it was like Game of Thrones, things like that. And I would always notice that on the mornings after the nights where we would just watch like show after show after show up until the point that we would go to bed, I would always feel hungover the next morning. Mm-hmm. I would have like a light hangover. And I couldn't describe why that would be because I'm not I don't really drink. I'm not a big drinker. I certainly wasn't drinking on the, nights before I'd have these hangovers. But at a certain point, I realized that it was the light, that the light was affecting my ability to have rejuvenating sleep. And I started wearing these blue light blocking glasses, amber colored glasses. And it was like a sort of night and day, no pun intended, like difference. I would feel much better the next day, rested, rejuvenated. Mm-hmm. So I also don't eat for 2 to 3 hours before I go to sleep. I feel great the next day when I don't do that. It also helps my body, I feel, regulate, signals related to hunger. Yeah. When I do sort of break that circadian inclination and eat late at night, I'm counterintuitively more hungry the next morning. You would think that wouldn't be the case because I had maybe an extra hit of calories, but I think it just throws everything out of whack. And then in the mornings, I don't eat for an hour or 2 or 3 after I wake up. In the mornings we have that amazing cortisol spike, which is the body's like top fat burning hormone. It's the body's chief catabolic hormone, and that's elevated when we wake up. So I try not to mess with that. And I also definitely don't eat if I have to wake up be earlier than my natural time time in which I wake up.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. What about so our buddy Ben, he's big because he flies back and forth like yourself too a lot. So I'm curious if you've tried this. He's big on, as soon as he gets in, he says this is if he's flying across country or even across the world, as soon as he gets in town, he looks up an infrared sauna and does an infrared sauna, and supposedly that's supposed to reset your circadian rhythm. Do you know anything about that, or have you ever tried that?
No, I don't, but I have a theory that using cold water, like showers, because it's a stressor on the body, doing that first thing in the morning could sort of like jumpstart, that sort of early morning cortisol milieu, but I don't know. I mean, that's just like a theory. One thing I do know, and that I learned when I interviewed Sechin Panda, which is super cool to know, if you have to wake up, due to an alarm clock, so before you would naturally arise, your body's melatonin probably has not yet come down, and your cortisol certainly hasn't spiked if you're waking up due to an alarm clock, which I did today to fly in for this. So, melatonin, when melatonin is elevated, we have less insulin sensitivity because melatonin is the body's sleep hormone. So once melatonin starts getting going in the evening hours, that's when the kitchen is closing. So that's when like metabolism is slowing down and things like that. The problem is you can also have elevated melatonin in the morning if you wake up really early due to your alarm clock because you got to get to work. So eating in that window, especially sugar and carbohydrates and things like that, is like the worst idea.
Wow. Now, what about like coffee too? What if you were to have, because it wouldn't be ideal to have coffee in that situation either, would it?
Well, coffee would get the cortisol up, though, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, coffee does get the cortisol up.
So then it would be advantageous to do that.
And coffee also helps to reset the body's circadian rhythm.
Okay.
Yeah, coffee sort of has a similar effect on the brain as bright light. So,
interesting.
So we can use coffee.
Gets that adenosine to circulate or whatever.
Yeah, adenosine.
Adenosine. I said it wrong, didn't I? Can you talk about this documentary that you're working on? You said that earlier, and it got my interest perked up a little bit.
Yeah. So, the first project that I ever decided to do in the health space is a documentary called Breadhead, and we're still working on it. But in the very beginning of 2015, I did a Kickstarter campaign for it, and people can go to breadheadmovie.com if they want to see the Kickstarter teaser. But essentially, it's the first ever dementia prevention documentary, and it really follows me going to talk to the top researchers in the world that are proving that our cognitive fate is something that falls within our control. And I've have filmed my mom over the years, and it's sort of a more, there's a lot of science in it, but it's also a very personal look into what it's like to have a loved one, a mother specifically, with dementia. And my goal is to really awaken people to the notion that dementia is a potentially preventable condition for most people.
I don't think a lot of people realize just how much of we're already seeing an explosion of Alzheimer's and dementia, but how much worse it's going to get with all the diabetes that people are getting.
Yeah.
Don't they call it type 3 diabetes?
Yeah. I mean, if you have type 2 diabetes, your risk for developing Alzheimer's increases 2 to 4-fold. So, I mean, it's just crazy. And right now, 5 million people in the U.S. have Alzheimer's. That number is set to triple by the year 2050. So it is going to explode. And Alzheimer's is just one form of dementia. So, I mean, like my mom doesn't have Alzheimer's. She has another form of dementia. There's a lot of people out there that have loved ones with other forms of dementia. And there's virtually no research on, Lewy body dementia, Parkinson's disease dementia. There's, frontotemporal dementia. There's all these little different variants. And all the money is going into Alzheimer's disease because it's the most common form of dementia. And so, I can tell you that we have a lot of information on diet and lifestyle and how it pertains to these more common versions of it. Alzheimer's disease, maybe mild cognitive impairment, things like that. But for people that have these more niche forms, it's like literally grasping at straws. And so, I mean, yeah, I think we're in trouble, and that's why my passion really has become to get this message of prevention out to young people, and also to try to figure out how to make it more enticing for them to start thinking about their brain health and things like that. Because I know, and I was guilty of this before I was directly affected because of my mom, most young people think of Alzheimer's disease as like an old person's condition.
Right.
Like something that's
not
going
to affect me.
Way down the road, not going to affect me. Maybe it's an inevitable part of aging. Maybe if my grandmother had it, it's sort of like baked in the cards for me. But these are all misconceptions that I'm trying to dispel.
When you look, with your knowledge that you have, especially in this arena, and you look at the younger generation coming up, with the video games, the processed foods, the high sugar diets, the lack of movement, what are the things that concern you? Like, what do you think, or what are we going to be dealing with in the next 15, 20 years?
I mean, definitely circadian disruption. That's something that today we have, all different types of entertainment, digital devices, things like that to keep us entertained 24 hours a day. It's making rest really difficult, and it's affecting sleep. We're more stressed out than we've ever been. I think that we have fewer and fewer healthy ways of dealing with that stress. Exercise, leisure time, recreational activity is at an all-time, or exercise activity is at an all-time low. Diets, our diets have become so mangled. Our food supply has become so industrialized. Most of the calories that we now consume come from ultra-processed foods. I don't really see it getting any better. I mean, I think people are becoming more informed, which is a great thing. But at the end of the day, I think people need to take more accountability for their own health. And, I don't know.
It is the biggest producers of foods are found in market economies, and those markets will follow the consumer. So I think if people are more educated and start to make decisions that are different, then you'll start to see the market follow. But right now, what people are going for is the convenience, and then the for lack of a better term, addictive properties of processed foods, because they're engineered to be so hyper palatable that, and they're easy. So it's like, if you have kids and you don't got time, and well, they don't eat this, but they'll eat that. So let me buy it, and they'll eat whatever I give,
and have Netflix babysit them.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that tends to be a problem. We have friends in this fitness and health space that get really angry when people say things like processed sugar is bad. And they say, no, the evidence shows that if the calories are low and the macros match or whatever, that sugar is not bad. What do you think about that?
But the thing is, it's not just about marketing, and the onus isn't just on the food manufacturers. I mean, I think we live lifestyles today that are so disharmonious with the kind of environment in which our brains evolved, that they're literally leaving them, whether or not we're conscious of it, screaming out for help. I mean, people that sit behind desks for 9 hours a day, literally like zero dopamine over the course of your workday, right? They get home from work, all they want to do is emotionally, get a tiny hit of dopamine from the kind of food that brings them the most pleasure, right? It's like a way of relieving stress. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was having this conversation with one of my brothers the other day who does sales for like this tech company, and his job is so difficult. I mean, it's like suited for his personality, but it's literally like no dopamine. Whereas like us, we have like these entrepreneurial lifestyles that thankfully we've had, the mental and emotional fortitude to go and pursue these kinds of jobs, that we have. But my brother, he works 9 hours a day. He's at this desk, zero dopamine, zero pleasure, zero joy, having conversations with people about, we were joking about like meeting, like the kinds of phrases that people use in meetings all the time, like, like let's circle back on that, or like these phrases that like everybody has in a meeting. They just have them sort of on like like they press buttons, and it's like, let's circle back on that. I'm going to loop this person in, or
keep
I'm
those TPS reports out. Huh?
TPS reports, yeah, or like I'm going to and so that's basically for most people's lives what they have to sort of wrap their brains around, so that by the time they get home, or, by the time the weekend comes around, it's like they go overboard with escapism. It's either escapism through food, or escapism with drugs, or going to like a concert and blasting out your eardrums, to feel a sense of connection with the people that you're standing with and listening to music, together with. So it's just like we've become really out of balance. And, I just think it's
So when you help somebody like that, like what are and I can't imagine what your DMs look like. I know what mine look like, and I don't post as good of information as you post on yours. So I imagine you get flooded with questions, and I know how hard it is for us to answer questions because there's so many variabilities. Do you have like big rocks that you tell someone in that exact situation, like where to start?
Man, I've been pretty lucky in the sense that my parents always kind of pushed me to follow my bliss. And so that's I would start there. I would start, kind of listening and kind of hearing the message behind the message. And I don't know, I think many people don't live the lives that they've imagined for themselves out of fear, maybe. And, I feel like once you're able to I don't know, shed the fear and do a level of introspection, I guess, and to kind of put yourself out there and to try to discover what it is that you're into. You know, it might take a little bit of experimentation. Malcolm Gladwell calls this concerted cultivation, but really kind of like opening the door to enough experiences where you can allow yourself to feel what it is to come alive.
Yeah.
You know, I think once you have that, you should go in that direction. I mean, we're only here for like a blip on the radar.
So when you talk to your brother, is that kind of like what you're nudging him to do? Is like, hey, bro, like
I have, yeah, I have. I mean, I think, you know, especially for, you know, one of my brothers has like ADD, which I think we all have ADD.
What'd you say?
ADD.
Yeah. Squirrel.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there's a disproportionate amount of entrepreneurs that with ADD, and I think it's because, you know, an ADD brain is essentially a brain that's hardwired for novelty seeking, and would have been the ultimate hunter-gatherer. I mean, you would have been like a tribe leader, you know, if you had ADD as a hunter-gatherer. You know, it's essentially a brain that rewards you for seeking out new foraging opportunities and bridging new connections, you know, and maybe doing a little more exploring than the average person. And today, that person, I feel like, is going to struggle under the constraints of you know, a desk job.
Right.
So
I read an interesting article on that where this author was speculating as to one of the reasons why their ADD is so much higher in a country like America. And one of the speculations he had was, well, you know, this is a country made up of totally of immigrants, a bunch of people who left countries in safety and came to a totally unknown place. It's like, I bet a lot of them had ADD. And I bet a lot of us are from these people with ADD.
Totally. I mean, I think we've pathologized ADD, but I don't think it's a problem. I think it's a context-specific problem. It's a problem if you're trying to fit yourself in a 9-to-5 job where you've got to sit in a cubicle all day, you know, answering phones and doing things like that. But for somebody who's like me, like getting, you know, every day is different. I mean, it's amazing.
Right.
It's also amazing at what a difference. I have 2 kids, and so I look at how they behave and their friends behave, and then I read a lot about children behavior, and it's funny how much you can control or seem to get rid of ADD symptoms or ADHD symptoms by having kids go outside and play and exercise and then feeding them a good diet. It's incredible the difference you see in them.
100%. I mean, there's some small studies using omega-3s. And kids with ADD seems to improve executive function. ADD is considered a problem related to executive function, which is sensory gating, attentional control, tuning out distractions, delaying gratification, all like prefrontal cortex stuff. And, you know, they're mediated, it seems, according to the literature that I've reviewed, by in a significant way by our diets and our lifestyles. You know, exercise, I think, is so important. Eating a healthy diet, really, really important. I never had good grades growing up in elementary school. My grades always suffered. I was always, you know, a favorite of the teachers because I always asked good questions. But when it came time to actually doing my work and preparing for the test and whatever, I just like always came up short. And so my grades were always extremely mediocre. And that's one of the reasons why, despite always really being fascinated by the human body and health and nutrition, I didn't go into medicine because I just didn't think that I'd be able to keep up in medical school. And I also grew up, you know, consuming things like corn oil, you know, not eating any fish ever, eating only lean protein and not really eating too many eggs because my mom told me that eggs could, you know, they would clog my little arteries, you know. And so I'll never be able to, you know, prove with, you know, any kind of certainty that my academic problems were caused by my diet growing up. But certainly they were related. And ever since I changed my diet and started eating more omega-3s, fewer omega-6s, more vegetables, things like that, I mean, my brain, I feel like, has turned on.
Can you speak to the benefits and maybe the misconceptions that people have with taking an omega-3? Because there's a lot of information out there in regards to taking omega-3 supplements. You've got some doctors that just tell every patient, just take it. You should take it. Everybody needs it. We don't get enough of it.
Yeah.
And then I've read literature that, you know, if you're over consuming 6 and 9s, 6 and 9s will outcompete the 3s anyways. So you may as well be flushing the fucking pills down the toilet anyways. Then I've even heard some people say that they're worthless completely. I think I just saw an article floating around Facebook just recently that said, new study comes out, says that taking omega-3s is a waste of time.
Yeah.
Where do you sit in all this?
I'm a big fan of omega-3s, and I've definitely seen many, many randomized control trials that have used omega-3s to positive result. I think, not everybody is going to need an omega-3 supplement. If you already have an optimized omega-3 index, they look at the ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s in the plasma membrane. If you're eating a diet that is biologically appropriate, has a comparable amount of omega-3s to omega-6s, taking an omega-3 supplement is not going to help you. If you already have, a condition, an inflammatory condition, I don't think that omega-3s are going to be enough to fix that condition. But if you're, eating a standard American diet, I think most people are going to see a dramatic improvement in many things once they right the ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s that we are meant to consume.
So that kind of confirms what I think I teach or I say, is I think that was the best information that I ever came across and read, which is, if you're lacking in it, and so this is kind of how I supplement. I pay attention to my diet. If, I'm pretty consistent with eating fish. And so when I'm not consistent with it, I tend to supplement with my omega-3.
Yeah.
I also pay attention to how much red meat and beef I'm consuming. And if that's really high, I'm trying to bring that back. And then I try to cycle in like white meats and fishes and things like that into my diet. So is it true that if I have extremely high, let's say that's all I eat is red meat, like a carnivore type of diet, and then taking an omega-3, am I consuming too many of the 6 and 9s that the 3 won't even matter? It'll out-compete it? Because that's what I've heard. Is that true? Do you know?
I mean, no. I would speculate that would help if all you're doing is eating red meat. I mean, I don't eat red meat if it's not grass-fed. I think it's, it's not worth the additional iron that you're getting. We guys, we can accumulate iron. I just found out that I have this polymorphism that makes me absorb more iron. And so I've become conscious of that. You don't want to overdo it on the iron.
No,
it can accelerate
toxic.
aging and get toxic. Yeah, and we don't have our periods like we don't have periods, so it's like we don't lose iron.
Yeah.
And it's obviously concentrated in red meat. You can also get a significant amount of iron from using a cast iron pan. I started using a cast iron pan because I wanted to adopt a healthier cooking.
We just switched to that.
Yeah.
Katrina came in the other day, and they're fucking heavy as shit.
It's cast iron, bro.
Yeah, dude, heavy.
Oh, cast iron's the best.
And you don't even the way you clean it's different. Like
You
we
just
don't,
wipe it.
yeah, we don't use dish soap or anything.
Some of the patina on
Yeah, you just scrub it with whatchamacallit or whatever, and you just leave it. You just leave some.
Yeah.
How'd you find out that you had that polymorphism? Was there a test, like a blood work that you did? Or?
I had kind of high levels of transferrin saturation, so like iron saturation. My iron was within a normal range, but and I'm not, I literally just found this out, so I haven't done too deep a dive. But one interesting thing that I discovered in the couple of hours that I spent researching is that you actually can, the only known compound to significantly block iron absorption when taken concurrently with food is calcium. So if you have one of these polymorphisms, because the risk is that you can develop something called hereditary hemochromatosis, which basically is an excessive accumulation of iron, and people that have that actually have to, I think, once a week or once a month give blood to get rid of that excessive iron.
Well, iron oxidizes, obviously. It rusts,
of
and that's what happens to your body with too much of it.
Crazy.
It ages faster. It literally oxidizes faster.
Yeah.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah. So I mean, just, I've become a little bit more conscious of that. And so when it comes to red meat, I really look at it as an amazing way to get in a broad array of nutrients. But if it's not grass fed, then I don't think it's worth it, because a grass fed piece of meat has an omega-3 to omega-6 ratio that mirrors that of a healthy human brain. Whereas when you get grain fed meat, it's much higher skewed in favor of omega-6s. You get less CLA, you get vitamin K2, so it's just not as nutrient dense.
Are you familiar with how different it is? So we're sponsored by Butcher Box, and one of the things I love about them is they're grass-fed, grass-finished. Is there a major difference between grass-fed, grass-finished, and then just grass-fed that you're aware of when it comes to the nutrient balance? And
you
stuff?
definitely want grass-fed, grass-finished, because if it's grain-finished, that really is what moves the needle on the healthiness of the meat, because they essentially fatten it up with grain, and that dictates the healthiness of the fat that's going to be in the meat.
Oh, okay.
So it is important that, because I think that's one of the hustles that you see in the grocery stores now is, they're advertising it as grass fed, but then the final week or two, they're still pumping it full of grain to fatten it up so it still tastes amazing too.
Yeah. I saw beef jerky the other day, and it was it said 100% grass-fed beef, and then in smaller font said used. 100% grass-fed beef used, which means that they could use grass-fed beef, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's all grass-fed. It's just like these.
Wow.
Yeah.
So these crazy what they can get away with,
awesome.
right?
Yeah. Oh, we use grass-fed beef.
Yeah.
For like 10% of our.
The grass-fed beef that we use is 100% grass.
Yes.
What a hustle. Oh, wow.
We're always getting hustled.
That's such bullshit. What are the top? What would you say are the top things people generally should avoid in their diets? Like, what are the big, bad, evil things in most people's diets that they should probably avoid?
Man, I think we've talked about like the grain and seed oils. Those are pretty bad for you. They
like
are
the hydrogenated vegetable oils.
Well, they're not even hydrogenated, but canola oil, corn oil, grapeseed oil. They all have trace levels of trans fats. 5 up to 5% trans fats found in organic non-GMO canola oil that you buy at Whole Foods is going to have trans fats due to the deodorization process.
Wow, and then that's what they actually use when they cook in their little.
Yeah.
Oh fuck.
Yeah.
Oh, that's why I don't eat there anymore.
Wow.
That's toxic. Coconut oil is not toxic. That's because there's no safe level of trans fat consumption.
What a bummer. That's Whole Foods.
Yeah.
We trust you, Whole Foods.
Yeah.
We can't anymore.
I mean,
You can't put all your trust in corporation like
no.
that.
Wow. Did you? I mean, you guys
Where's
know
your
that
skeptic brain?
That's
Yeah.
that's the oil they use.
I know.
Yeah, so I don't
You know
buy
why?
the food that's already pre-made.
It's
You know
cheaper.
what? It's cheap because it's subsidized.
Right.
It's so cheap.
It's a subsidized oil. Just like all the things that we like. Why do they use corn syrup on it?
Shame on you, Whole Foods.
I know it's not. Yeah.
It's the same reason why corn oil.
It's not health
or
foods.
excuse me, corn
You know what I
syrup
mean?
is used instead of what is it called? Sugar.
Yeah.
Subsidized.
Yeah. Yeah. I would take my food sauteed in butter, coconut oil any day over canola oil. It's really unhealthy. And, people tend to think that canola oil is healthy because it contains omega-3s, but omega-3s are actually even more vulnerable to the oxidation process than omega-6s. And so, these oils, they undergo extraction using harsh chemical solvents, heat, machinery. Then they go through these other industrial steps. One of them is deodorization, makes them tasteless. I mean, take an oil like extra virgin olive oil. It's got a very distinct flavor, right? These, conversely, like corn oil, canola oil, soybean oil, they're engineered to have no flavor. And manufacturers love that because it allows them to use them in anything from salad dressings to mayonnaises, which I've heard you guys talk about, to granola bars. They use it to, as a varnish to coat roasted nuts and dried fruits and things like that. So it's like, they're pretty unhealthy. And so I would say that that is definitely one of the things that I've if I'm traveling, I'm on the road, I'm getting some canola oil. I know it, but when I'm home and I'm cooking, and you're never going to find anything made with canola oil in my house. Right. Yeah.
What about sugar?
Sugar's bad. It's funny when I talk about
that's a soundbite we're going to use right there.
Yeah, that's the one.
Sugar's bad.
Yeah,
okay?
just stir some shit right there.
Well, but the thing is, okay, so can we talk about like on Instagram? I feel like there's this thing. There's the whole like calories in, calories out.
Yes.
And so I know many people in the fitness community are like, sugar isn't bad. Yeah. If you're eating more calories than you're burning, that's bad.
Yeah.
IIFYM, bro.
It's like the calories in, calories out model. But I'm having chronically elevated levels of insulin in your body, which occur as a result of chronic sugar consumption, is no bueno. It's not good for anybody, whether or not you're trying to gain muscle or lean out or whatever. So I eat a low sugar diet. I eat a very low grain diet. And the only times that I'll really eat sugar or grain is in the post-workout window when I know that sugar, those carbs, that glucose is going to serve me by refilling my muscles with glycogen,
Not to mention 90% of the population walk around 90% of the time in a fucking surplus. So
Exactly.
when you look at
So we're doing both.
because if we were all if we were in a
hungry.
deficit, and if everybody was equally in a deficit, and we were having a little bit of sugar here and there, we'd all be fucking skinny.
Exactly.
But we're not. We do. That's not the case.
No, it's like these Instagram fitness gurus. They're like, pizza doesn't make you fat. Eating more calories than you're burning makes you fat. I'm like, well, obviously.
Yeah.
But are you telling people, in a nation where 50% of us at least are either pre-diabetic or diabetic, and way more are hyperinsulinemic, that pizza is okay?
And plus we all we look at is obesity, and yes, obesity is a risk factor for all these chronic illnesses. However, a sizable minority of people who have things like diabetes and dementia related stuff and chronic disease are normal weight. There's some.
Right.
There's a decent. I mean, there's millions of Americans who have diabetes who are never overweight. There's
Right.
millions of Americans who get a heart attack who weren't overweight.
Yeah.
So the whole focus on being overweight, like
You can't base it on your physique.
yeah, no, it's not the only thing. In fact, sometimes I think it's probably a gift for some people to become overweight because at least they have an outward sign.
Yeah, at least
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Like,
know?
oh, maybe I should clean up my diet.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Sadly, that's the incentive for most people, right?
Yeah, it's
Like
aesthetic.
not going to the doctor and seeing that you've got, an A1C of 5.8 and
Yeah.
you're like almost, it's just it's crazy. So
I want to take you. I'm going to take a left with you right now because we could talk nutrition all day long with you.
I love it.
But I like talking about your sex life and things that are off like that. So I mean, you're on TV. You got a New York Times bestseller. You got a podcast going. You're traveling all over the world. You got beautiful women around you all the time. How happy are you right now?
first of all,
All those things are
We
fucking
just
true,
painted
bro.
you an awesome picture right there.
most of the beautiful, I don't have beautiful women around me all the time.
Just every time we see you.
Every time I see you,
Yeah,
Like every time.
I do have a number of female friends who are brilliant, who are kind,
Yes.
who are attractive. Most of them have boyfriends and or husbands.
oh, okay.
But no, I'm,
We're teasing you.
I would say I'm mostly happy. I'm still very, I'm very happy that I've been able to channel what's going on in my home life with my mom into something positive, and that makes me feel like I'm, I've got a career that's going well. Like that makes me feel really good. But I'm upset by the fact that my mom is very sick, and that is, horrible to have to contend with. I mean, I'm with her. Like I was just yesterday, I spent a lot of time with her. She has like this stomach pain that's like non-specific, and her ability to communicate is like extremely limited. She's becoming, more catatonic by the day. And, my mom has pigment in her hair. She's blonde. Like it's horrendous to see what she's having to go through. And I'm the point person in my family. I'm the person in the family, obviously, that but that's
Everybody looks to.
that's equipped to take her to these doctor appointments and but at the same time, like I also want to live my own life. Like I'm super happy to be out here
That has to
hanging out
be
with you guys.
fucking so hard.
Yeah, I'm going to Burning Man for the first time this week. I'm going to be out of town for a week. Ultimately, I want to be back in LA. Like most of my friends, girls and guys, like, my dating life is in Los Angeles. It's not in New York. In New York, I don't date ever because I'm just so wrapped up in my family. I live with my brother in this like tiny little apartment. It's really difficult. I would be in LA. I would, have a normal life. I would have a car. I would, I don't have any of that stuff. I'm like back and forth. I can't, so that to me is stressful, and that's not ideal. So one of the major reasons why my dating life sucks.
Do you struggle with that decision sometimes of like doing that, where I'm sure you're constantly being reached out to, like you said, because you're the point man in
Yeah.
the situation where you're
When people reach out to me, it makes me feel so good that it makes it all worth it, right? Like, I mean, that's the fact that I've kind of like sacrificed in many ways my life for the family, but I also don't want to, I also am cognizant of the fact that I could easily 10 years from now look back at my life and say that I regret not living more of it for me. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to sort of strike that balance and, spend more time doing what it is I love. But the sole reason why I spend time in New York is because of my family. I wouldn't be in New York
if it wasn't for that.
It wasn't for that.
Right.
Mm-hmm. You're such a good person, man. Very, very likable and a very, very good person. And I think your family's blessed to have you. But I do want to ask you about Burning Man. You excited?
Dude, I'm so excited. I've never been.
Really?
Yeah.
Neither have we.
Oh man.
We need to get
People
it.
keep
we
trying to
gotta-
get us to go, and we're like,
Are you going to remain sober while you're out there? Or are you going to do what's going on? Because everybody out there apparently, I've never been out there.
Yeah.
But I know you don't smoke
just
weed.
give us a wink.
You don't
I
drink.
don't smoke weed.
You don't do anything. You're just going to go out and watch everybody get weird.
I'll tell you what, I do have lots of electrolytes. I brought lots of electrolytes with me.
That is important, sir.
You nerd.
Bro, could he be?
You nerd.
Hey, it's my boy right here. It's my boy right here.
Yeah, all I'm thinking about is like I got literally like a fucking vial of real salt in my backpack.
Yeah.
I'm going to be pounding that shit, putting it in my Camelback. No, I'm super excited. First of all, there needs to be a Mind Pump camp at Burning Man. I feel like that would be epic.
Oh, wow.
But no, yeah, I would say I don't really enjoy alcohol all that much. I definitely don't like weed, but I have experimented with, mushrooms, and I do find them to be like a powerful nootropic.
Yeah.
And they enhance my executive function. So I'm.
Oh, you're talking about microdosing.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because taking a mega dose ain't gonna do that.
No. No. I don't like chemically induced anxiety. And once I experienced like a little bit of anxiety from them, and I definitely don't want that feeling. But like, yeah, I don't like ever losing control ever. But I do feel like it's they've done these like really interesting fMRI studies where it creates connectivity between disparate brain regions that aren't normally talking to one another, and to me that's really cool. I definitely have noticed that when I've tried them, and I don't endorse trying them publicly because they're of
course.
But the research out of Johns Hopkins and NYU,
Fascinating.
super fascinating. We've talked about this, yeah, and just personal experience, like definitely have.
Who are you rolling out there with? Are you
So
going
you're
out
gonna
with
have
a big
some fun,
group?
is what it sounds like.
Big group or by yourself? Who are you going with?
I'm going with two close friends, and then we're part of a camp, and then just having lived in LA for such a long time, I have
Gonna know a ton
of
people.
friends. Yeah.
Are you gonna? Did you bring like weird? Are you gonna wear like steampunk clothes and shit?
No.
Yeah.
I'm such a like neurotic, like I just don't want to die. I want to like make that. Yeah.
Get like zinc oxide.
I'm like, I need my electrolytes. I'm like, should I bring like protein powders or like, but no, I went to this place like Uniqlo. I don't know if you've heard of Uniqlo. We're big fans of it on the East Coast because they make super high tech. It's a Japanese company. They make super high tech like functional clothing that keeps you warm. And so I bought all this like warm shit to wear at night.
So no nipple clamps and tutus?
No nipple clamps and tutus. Yeah. Maybe next year, maybe the second year.
All right.
This year I'm literally
You're observing this year.
All right.
I'm excited that you're going because I feel like you're one of our buddies that we connect with.
Do some research for us.
Bro, you're like a version of me going to Burning Man.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
So I'm gonna wait for you. If you come back okay, then maybe I'll go.
Right.
and
We
check
got
it
you
out.
in, I think you're at Podcast Hard, right? And at the end of September, we'll see you out in Tahoe, won't we? Are you out there? Yeah, that'll be a fun event, too.
Right.
We're excited for that. We're throwing a big
Super
party
excited.
on Saturday. That's going to be cool.
Well,
Can't wait.
I tell you what, if you haven't listened to Max's podcast, The Genius Life, you got to listen to it. Excellent podcast. You are definitely one of our favorite people, so we'll do this again at some point.
Absolutely.
Either we'll see you down in LA or we'll have you back up here. Have a great time in Burning Man. Please don't die.
Yeah. Don't die.
Yeah,
man.
stay alive.
We like you.
Thank you guys
we
so
like
much.
you a lot,
Likewise,
man.
likewise.
And that's it, brother. Good to see you again.
Thank you, man.
Sam, you guys rule.
Thank you for listening to Mind Pump. If your goal is to build and shape your body, dramatically improve your health and energy, and maximize your overall performance, check out our discounted RGB Super Bundle at mindpumpmedia.com. The RGB Super Bundle includes MAPS Anabolic, MAPS Performance, and MAPS Aesthetic. 9 months of phased expert exercise programming designed by Sal, Adam, and Justin to systematically transform the way your body looks, feels, and performs. With detailed workout blueprints and over 200 videos, the RGB Super Bundle is like having Sal, Adam, and Justin as your own personal trainers, but at a fraction of the price. The RGB Super Bundle has a full 30-day money-back guarantee, and you can get it now plus other valuable free resources at mindpumpmedia.com. If you enjoy this show, please share the love by leaving us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes and by introducing Mind Pump to your friends and family. We thank you for your support, and until next time, this is Mind Pump.